reminded me, and this is a true one, this was a lady over in Trevena, and a friend of ours met her in the main street and asked how she was, and she said, oh, she said, I went to this here wedding on Saturday. She said, oh, it was handsome. She said, a lot of they women was wearing they girt hats, you know, they great big ones. She said, but a lot of them was wearing they little fornicators. The Cornish often get their words wrong. Maybe not. I'm not. Right, I'm sure you're all ever so excited at the prospect of a general election next year.
220 days left,
That's
what they said on Radio 1.
You've got time to think about it then,
Well, somebody came up canvassing for a local election a year or two ago, and he told me this story, and I promise you it's true, with a little bit of poetic, you know, license. I've called it a fishy tale. My cousin workmate, he said his name was Blake, and one day he decided a pond he'd like to make. He had a handsome garden with conservatory and such, so he thought a little fish pond would add the finishing touch. So he dug this great big pit out and bought a plastic liner. This pond was going to be perfect, you wouldn't see nothing finer. He bought Canadian pondweed and water lilies too, and then some water iris. They was yellow though, not blue. Well, he planted all these pond plants, and then he scratched his head. I reckon there's something missing, was what this fella said. Then he had inspiration. Yes, I know what I'd need. I'll buy myself some goldfish to swim around me weed. So off he went to Bodmin, some goldfish for to buy, and chose a dozen koi carp, because he was a wealthy guy. He carried them home so careful, and in the pond they went. And he went bed that evening feeling happy and content. But Fed, now she got a habit of upsetting human plans, and unfortunately for Mr. Blake, she was targeting this man's. Because as our proud pond builder was in bed so snug and warm, little did he know that this was the still before the storm. See, next door to our hero, there lived a ginger cat. He was well fed and pampered, but you wouldn't call him fat. He had a healthy appetite for halibut and egg, for kitty cat and whiskers. Oh, and his name was Jake. He had a scar above one eye from battles he had fought, and people told some shocking tales about creatures he had caught. His shoulder was a bit skew-whiff where once he had been mauled, and just behind his left-hand ear he was completely bald. He prowled around hedgerows, devouring little birds, and attacked his owner's parrot, causing many angry words. No, not a thing was sacred, not a guinea pig nor rabbit. And if old Jake should catch a mouse, oh, he had this nasty habit of torturing the little beast and pawing it until he grew tired of his little game and made his final kill. As Jakey boy was wicked, he was evil, he was mean, he really was the nastiest cat that you have ever seen. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this evil muggy Jake was living in the house next door to poor old Mr. Blake. And one night, when this cat had had his supper in his dish, he went outside and sniffed the air and smelled the smell of fish. All pent up with excitement, he gave a wicked mew, because as they splashed round in next door's pond, well, you could hear them too. Then Jake, who was quite crafty, he used his seventh sense and made a stealthy entry through the hole in next door's fence. By this time it was pretty late, so it was way past midnight, and Jake's green eyes, they glinted and they sparkled with delight. Meanwhile, the koi carp's owner, he was in slumber deep, but Jake's ensuing actions awoken from his sleep. A splashing sound had reached his ears as he lied there in bed. "There's summat at me fish pond," to Mrs. Blake he said. He shot downstairs and out the door and froze at what he saw, because Jake was at his fish pond dibbing fish out with his paw. The one he got beside him, well, he was already dead. In fact, the only bit remaining was the remnants of his head. Poor Mr. Blake was livid as he chased that cat away. "You wait, you little blighter," Mr. Blake was heard to say. The following day, he went outside and got a bit of wood. He'd mend that fence immediately, keep that cat out if he could. But having eaten one koi carp, that Jake was really errant. He had done the rest of them, that wood was no deterrent. So the following night was similar. He heard a mighty splash. So Mr. Blake jumped out of bed and made a frantic dash. This time he crept out quietly and grabbed that thieving cat. And really, I'm quite ashamed to say what happened after that. That fellow was so angry, and though he knowed it was a sin, he whizzed that cat round his tail and aved the wretch right in. He splashed around and spluttered and very nearly drowned, but finally he managed to get out on solid ground. Old Jake was scat to lerrups. He really was upset. His feline pride was dented and he was streaming, leaking wet. And 2 days later in the village, Mr. Blake was told that Jake the cat, who lived next door, had got an awful cold. Yes, Jake, he was regretting that he'd gone out and fished, because poor old chap the following day, he looked and felt some wished. By this time, frantic Mr. Blake was about at his wit's end, because that there Jake was driving him completely round the bend. He said, "I know what I'm going to do to bring him to his senses. I know a bloke down Truro who supplies electric fences." So off he went to Truro very early the next day and had an electric fence installed with minimum delay. He didn't need a high one. He very quickly found he only needed to be put just so far off the ground. When Mrs. Blake seen what he'd done, she turned a little pale. She said, "The RSPCA will come round and put us both in jail." But her husband was determined. There was no turning back. He was prepared now to withstand that tomcat's next attack. And sure enough, the following night, Jake made his regular visit. And it isn't too difficult to imagine what happened next now, is it? That cat crept forward to the pond with cruel paws stretched out. If he'd seen the wire, he didn't realise what it was all about. Then suddenly, Jake's tail made contact with the electric wire, and that there cat, he really thought that he had caught on fire. He rocketed into the air about 4 feet from the ground, and from his throat emitted a most unearthly sound. It was a mixture of a strangled scream and anguished wail, and sparks shot out from both his ears and also from his tail. The hair along his body stuck out sideways in a line. He looked a lot less like a cat, more like a porcupine. He'd done a double somersault, then bolted double quick. He thought that he was being chased by demons or the whole neck. And as that glowing moggy disappeared into the night, oh, Mr. Blake, he rubbed his hands and said with pure delight, "I reckon now he've used up 8 of his 9 lives at least. And one day soon I shall have the 9th and get that little beast." Meanwhile, Jake's lady owner just simply can't work out why her fluorescent light comes on whenever Jake... The battle still continues between Mr. Blake and Jake. I do wonder how much more punishment the man and cat can take. Now, I don't know what you think, but to me it is crystal clear that one dark night before too long, that cat will disappear. They'll never find his body. Of that I am quite sure. But Mr. Blake and his koi carp will live in peace once more.